Welcome to Banff, everyone. Artists are inherently practical, despite what you may have heard. I don't know any that focus on an ideal experience, though they, or we, I should say, often consider the ideal experience for each specific piece. And many of us are regularly unable to achieve it. Many, perhaps most in the performing arts, I work in theater, dance, and music myself, think deeply about audience and their response, or responses is more appropriate, and often struggle with how organizations define and constrain experience for them and their audiences. The Banff Playwrights Lab here at the Center is in its 45th year. I'm the director of the lab and, as mentioned, also director in Toronto of the creation company Night Swimming. The lab this year has 50 artists here in residence over these 3 weeks from Canada, Australia, Denmark, the UK, and the US, including our esteemed playwright in residence, Janet Sears. Like you, our focus this year has been on audience. And it has been challenging and intriguing for me to simultaneously consider these issues from the artistic and organizational sides of the equation. At the lab, we have been focusing on two aspects in this realm. One, performing to audiences that are changing over time, from performance to performance during a run, from city to city for those who tour Canada. Audiences are changing, as many of you know, particularly in larger cities where they're getting more culturally diverse and where the age range is broader, at least in some venues. We're talking here about what it means to playwrights and to creators to hear their stories when the audience makeup changes from night to night or city to city, asking storytellers to think about who is this play for, which audience, can it play equally well in every city or every night? For example, the audience that my recent touring show experienced in Saskatoon was very different, particularly in terms of cultural diversity, to those experienced in Vancouver and Toronto. If an audience is primarily South Asian one night, what is different the next night when it is largely white? We've been talking here about who we imagine to be the audience for certain new works. Who do you imagine your audience to be, ideal or not? Did you imagine white people? The default audience that many artists and many organizations imagine is still a white audience. And if indeed that is true, what are we going to do about it? Two, we're also examining the ways that playwrights are incorporating audiences as participants into their new creations, something increasingly common, and a strategy that absolutely speaks to some of the areas in the report that was released yesterday, particularly fun, new experiences, and engagement. What follows are a few snapshots from the artistic perspective based on our conversations at the lab over the last few weeks. My favorite moment so far was during a session earlier this week when we gathered most of the lab participants together, when playwright Bea Pisano, artistic director of the Luna Theatre, a Latinx theatre company in Toronto, when asked to speak, as everyone was, about where audience sits in her landscape as a creator and a company, said, "The audience is the motherfucker." And as I thought about whether to use this quote or not, I too had to think a little bit about audience and how they, or rather you, would receive that statement, one that we in the room, all of us artists, knowingly laughed along with when it was shared by Bea. So a few snapshots. Welcoming is crucial. What are the strategies to welcome an audience, to make the experience personal and individual and therefore unique, to feel like an individual rather than part of an anonymous group? Food and drink, in other words, hosting, is an essential component. How and to what extent is food and drink available or incorporated into the event, and how is it related to the content of the show or performance? Welcoming and eating, as you all know, are at the heart of community and of gathering. Theaters tend to be static in their relationship to audience. The relationship is largely the same every night, kind of like this. I believe that theaters need to more actively explore how to make this static relationship more active and engaged, not with more e-blasts, although they're valuable, or ancillary activities, but actually in the room. Novelty is crucial. New relationships between artists and audience offer the possibility of deeper connection and therefore deeper exploration together of the content. Maiko Yamamoto, co-artistic director of Vancouver's Theatre Replacement, who developed a new piece here last week at the lab called Mine, calls it shared engagement, in which performance, community, sight, and engagement are built into the experience. And if anything sounds ideal to me, that might be it. And Maiko reminded us that presenters, especially at festivals, are very interested in engagement with audiences and often much more capable of providing it. And I certainly agree with her assessment about festivals based on my own experiences touring new works across the country. Increasingly, my company's projects are performance events rather than plays. The static audience-performance relationship is, of course, extremely well suited to certain stories and certain shows. But often, to be frank, they're boring, even to someone like me who's been addicted to theater since a teenager. Based on my recent experiences, intriguingly, museums are more interested and better able to incorporate deeply audience-engaged performance works. With night swimming, we've done shows recently at Victoria's Royal British Columbia Museum, the National Music Centre in Calgary, Calgary's Lougheed House, the Aga Khan Museum, and Fort York in Toronto, all of which embrace participatory works in and throughout their environment. These venues deal with audiences in much different ways than sit-down theaters, and my hope is that more theaters embrace more ways of creating, and therefore more ways of intersecting effectively and powerfully with audiences. Can museums and theaters, for example, learn from each other and the very different experiences they each provide, and both present more richly varied offerings that draw from the strengths of each? For a lot of performing arts organizations, engagement is put into ancillary events and activities rather than at the center of their core artistic work. Much of that core artistic work retains a conventional passive audience-performance relationship. So the issue becomes how to engage with individuals during the arrival, the hosting, the departure, one might call it the customer experience, rather than through things such as talkbacks, which, although often invaluable, can often also seem like an offering of false intimacy and controlled engagement rather than free play and interaction. Many of the artists here working on works at the lab, and many of their works are being designed with the audience playing a more central role in the performance and the experience. This creates a challenge. Where do these works fit in terms of the theaters that have the highest capacity to bring them into contact with audiences, but are generally least able to accommodate because of their organizational structure perhaps, or indeed often because of their architectural structure, least able to accommodate performance events which require very different presentation strategies. Thus, these works tend to find homes in festivals by independent creators, where the ideal cultural experience can in fact be co-designed by the artists, creating the work in collaboration with the organization presenting it to the audience. One example being developed here during the lab, in fact I'll be going to that, a workshop of it this afternoon, takes place through and during and over a dim sum meal. Another by the UK company Fevered Sleep that we're working on here, called Grieving Things, or at least that's its working title, takes the form of a shop that people wander into to talk about grief and have the opportunity to buy products that were designed specifically for the show. Another UK company present here this week has among its many interdisciplinary elements aroma as a central creative tool, which I love. There's a show that is actually set, a theatre replacement show that we worked on last week, that is actually set within the video game Minecraft, that spectators watch being played live in front of them by the creators and also by children that are invited from each community each night to participate in the show. We have an immersive musical in which the audience becomes members of a cult. My own company, Night Swimming, has developed a piece in which the audience becomes a choir every night. Another that takes the form of a salsa dance lesson in which everyone dances. And another in which, at the end, after the artists finish the performance and leave the room, the individuals present can either leave money to pay for their ticket or take money from a pile of cash that has been used in the show. How are audiences defining the experience? Audiences are demanding active experience rather than passive spectatorship, especially among younger audiences, as many of you know, but not by any means only among those. The lab put out a call for theatre works in which audience involvement and participation is central to the event. We received lots of applications of all kinds. It's illuminating to me that playwrights are absorbing the expanding interest in audience engagement and imagining how they and their works can have more impact on their audiences. And I believe this is in part due to audiences' increasing demand for more activation. The question is, where do these works live? The audience, indeed, may be a mother, as Bea said, because the complexities of the invitation that we make to audiences are so rich, so elusive, and ever-changing. And that's what Bea was grappling when she said that. We craft an experience in the faith that, yes, I suppose it may be ideal, but ideal isn't really part of our vocabulary. We want it to be welcoming, compelling, moving, unavoidable, life-changing. Thank you.